Some simple DIY decor ideas that will transform your home for spring. Welcome to the Chic Show. The Everything Crafting playlist is hosted by Lady Red Crafting, Our Gray House, and Sunflower Tasha DIYs. We'll be using part of this Halloween sign, this cooling rack, and this scrap piece of wood from another project. I took the cooling rack outside and I gave it a coat of flat black spray paint. Then I removed this part of the Halloween sign and I'm turning it over and I'm going to be painting it with black chalk paint. I'm using Waverly chalk paint and ink. For this little scrap piece of wood, I'm going to be giving it a coat of white chalk paint. I'm using Waverly in Snow White. Once the white paint is dry, I'm going to give this little piece of wood a distressed look using black chalk paint and a chip brush. I'm just brushing in along the edges of the wood and along the sides. To stamp the words on the front of the sign, we're going to be using insignia stamps from IOD. This is from their new spring release. I placed my letters on this thin mount and then I used some black ink that I got from Hobby Lobby and I just stamped the words onto the front. Did have a little excess ink there, but I think that just kind of adds to the distressed look of the sign, so I'm not going to worry about removing that. Now I'm going to stamp on the word garden. I felt like it needed a little something at the bottom there, so I'm using one more stamp from the IOD apothecary labels from last year, and I'm just going to add on this little doodad at the bottom. I also used the insignia stamps for the word welcome on this black part of the sign, and I'm using a white ink pad for this. I felt like my gate needed a little hook or latch, so I chose this little hinge that I found in my stash, and I'm using some black rub and buff to go over the hinge so that it will match the gate. I used this little piece of wire that I actually just found on the floor. Not sure where that came from, but it was the perfect size, so I cut it in half, and I'm using those to attach my sign to the gate. I'm just twisting those wires around in the front and then I'm going to push them flat so that it does have kind of a primitive look. Then I'm snapping one of the rungs here of the cooling rack so that I can slide on that hinge. I used hot glue to attach the top of the sign, the welcome part, to the cooling rack, and I added a little bit of hot glue to the bottom of the hinge just to hold it in place. Simply arrange your flowers or photos in a way that feels playful and spring inspired. This project is not only budget friendly, but it's also a great way to reuse and recycle items you already have at home. Next up, we have a DIY Easter shelf sitter perfect for adding a touch of color to any room. This project uses only a few simple materials, including a wood egg cutout and a paint inlay. A rub-on transfer, stipple, or scrap paper would work as well. First, I painted the front, back, and sides of my egg using Waverly chalk paint in plaster. This is my favorite warm white. Now I'm using a paint inlay that I got in Sonnet's Maker's box, and I'm just going to cut it and piece it together to cover as much of the egg as I can, and then I'll use some painter's tape to tape it in place. Now, in hindsight, I wish I had not taped it in place because it was a little difficult to work with. I wish I had just done it piece by piece, but it worked out okay. Now, for a paint inlay, you do want to give it a coat of paint, let it dry, and then give it a second coat. And while it's wet, spritz the paint inlay with some water and then lay it gently on your surface. And here you can see I'm struggling just a little bit. I did have some wrinkles. In the end, they're not as noticeable on camera as they are in person, but hopefully I can fix that later. Once I have everything placed like I want it, I did give it another spritz of water, and then I used a paper towel and just dabbed that excess water back while pressing down onto the paint. So we want the paint from the inlay to go into the wet paint that I have applied. Once it is completely dry, and I did wait several hours for this, once it's completely dry, I did spritz it with more water, again dabbed back some of the excess water and pressed down at the same time, and then we'll be able to pull that paper back. The great thing about paint inlays is that you can use them 2 or 3 times. Each time the color will get a little bit lighter and lighter, but it's great for a distressed look. And just as a reminder, you can use scrapbook paper and decoupage that on. You could use rub-on transfers or even stamps. As I pull away the rub-on transfer, I am just setting aside those little scrap pieces. I probably won't reuse those, but this larger piece in the middle I will reuse. I will set this aside to dry, and then I will seal it with a clear spray paint. Now, once this is completely dry, I'm going to use my gold stamp pad to stamp around the edges, kind of give it a look of gold leaf. And I just want that sporadic in random places all around the edges. If you're looking for a project that's a little more dramatic, try creating a spring-inspired hanger to display dried florals, photos, or even, as its intended use, for clothing. I'm giving my wooden hanger a coat of Waverly chalk paint in plaster. I'm actually giving it 2 coats, and I'm not painting the metal hanger part. I'm just painting the wood parts. And I'm going to be piecing together some scraps of rub-on transfers that I have. All of these transfers are from IOD. Now, once I have that neutral background of that white plaster chalk paint, I'm going to go over that with Waverly chalk paint in moss. I'm just arranging my transfers in a way that feels balanced and beautiful, and I'm just layering them on top of each other when necessary, and I'm just wrapping them around the hanger, trying not to think too much about it. And finally, I'm taking some of the typography that I had that was left over from another project, and I'm just using my fingernail to apply the transfers on the bar across the hanger. It just seems to be a little bit easier with my own fingernail. Now I'm looking at it, I think I need to jazz it up just a little bit. So I'm going to be using some scrap pieces from some of the gilded transfers from IOD. And I'm applying these with no rhyme or reason, just in various places, just to add a little bit of shine. Now we need to do something with that hanger part. So I'm going to be using some gold paint, and I'm just going to paint that on the front and the back and even the little knob underneath the hanger. Today we covered some simple yet effective DIY decor projects that can help you welcome spring into your home. So don't forget to share your own DIY projects with us in the comments below. And if you're looking for more home decor tips and inspiration, be sure and check out the playlist and the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Remember to share the chic. Bye now.